So yeah, so I'm a library guy, but one of my rules is whenever I do these kinds of things outside of work, I don't talk about libraries, because I do it all day, all the time. So I want to take and sort of explain to you what I saw in this painting, why I ended up with the crazy guy painting here, and tell you a little bit more about that guy's life. Something strange about me is that I like work a lot. I work all the time in a good way. Like, it's not one of these things where I'm just like a crazy workaholic, but I'm just like one of those people that like I am constantly going. Like, I'm gonna leave here, I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna do a bunch of stuff. It is not uncommon to get emails from me at midnight. I have to like consciously do things in order to slow myself down. I end up traveling for work a bunch, and whenever I go to other places, which I love to do, I try to find a way to find like a new adventure along the way. So one of the things that I do is I like to go camping. I like to go solo camping. So when I saw this actually was a scene that I find both like comforting and a little bit uncomfortable. And I think that's actually one of the reasons I do it. I was on a trip last summer in which I went up to the coast of Lake Superior to do a talk about libraries. I said I wouldn't say anything about libraries, so I'll leave it there. But after that, I went way up to the boundary waters, and I drove all the way out to the end of this road. And I set up camp, and it was a scene like exactly like this. You know, it was kind of crazy. And so what I do is I'll have a campfire there. I always bring one book with me, and usually it is poetry, and I never read poetry except for in this particular instance, because it's the one time that I actually am able to like kind of slow down and focus on something that's like that kind of intentional and well crafted and usually short. And so there's this thing that happens if you're sitting there and you have a headlamp on and you have a campfire and you're reading, you get really into it for a second, right? And your eyes, they completely adjust to the bright page in front of you. And so when you hear a noise out in the woods, somewhere near your campfire, you look up and you can't see anything. And so this, like, when I saw this, I was just like thinking of that weird, spooky feeling, at the same time, intentional, comforting feeling of being out in this space. I'm a librarian, so ultimately I want to look everything up, right? I want to look it up and know as much as I could. But there is sort of this like sad story with this guy that I feel like you cannot get away from the fact that, you know, this was a dude who was like an absolutely fantastic painter who had this terrible time actually selling his stuff while he was alive. And this was painted like basically like 1 year before he got checked in for his first mental breakdown, right? And so it's really impossible once you learn that to like not look at this painting and think of like what kind of escapist thing was going on in this man's mind while he was making it, right? And so that notion of escapism kind of resonated with me as well. I try to kind of rejuvenate, but I think you have to watch that there's a healthy balance between rejuvenate and just checking out, right? And I think my man was just kind of checking out. Wouldn't you say?
That's got depression written all over it.
I know. Well, but it's weird because it's got depression, but I feel like it flips back and forth for me.
At least I feel a peacefulness in it, and I think it could be a comfortable thing.
Think about like the driveway just off the edge that you know, high school romance, pull up to the lake.
Right.
Huh? I mean, full moon. I mean, come on, that's got romance written all over it.
I think that it's the context in which something is made absolutely dictates what that thing is. So thinking about that, like, what was the man? Maybe he knew he was about to be checked into a mental institution.
So it is interesting. I was just going to say that, not to get too much in like 19th century history or early 20th century history, this idea of like the rescue cure, and I think that for females it was sort of what is it, neurasthenia?
Neurasthenia.
Right. But for men, it was somehow you need to get out into the outdoors and go out west and travel. That's interesting that, we're kind of boxing them in terms of mental illness, but in thinking about those that need some sort of avenue for escape or restfulness, that you're actually feeling a similar thing beyond his own experience. I mean, maybe you're both two people that were just seeking solace. And so I think that's a way to kind of get out of the mental illness aspect and just the reprieve that we're all sort of searching for. And that gets this image more to the universal than sort of compartmentalizing it into a sort of mental illness interpretation.
It doesn't feel like it serves a purpose other than sort of like a personal purpose in making it, right? For me.
Type 2 fun. It's kind of becoming a pretty well-known phenomenon among outdoor adventurers. I do a lot of hiking, backpacking, and it's pushing yourself so hard that you kind of look at each other and go, why the heck did we want to do this in the first place?
Yeah.
And that's what I think. But there's something really, and as I was sitting here thinking, I was relating that to mental illness and artists, thinking in that concept, because it's a well-known fact with artists, writers, that many of them don't want to, if they are suffering with mental illness, choose not to take medication because it then dulls their senses and they're not able to push into that artistic aspect in that space that they're able to do without the medication. And so I don't know if I'm just being crazy, but I was thinking that actually kind of can be maybe a little bit comparable with type 2 fun and the reality of living with your mental illness rather than choosing to medicate so you dull those senses.
Is the moon a source of comfort in this painting for you? Like
If there was no moon, you wouldn't see anything.
Yeah.
I think standing right here in front of it, thinking about the comfortable, uncomfortable balance that you were talking about. Sometimes I feel uncomfortable. From right here, I'm uncomfortable because of the shadows over here and the tree actually really kind of is scary looking. It reminds me of a tree. I don't know what kind it is, but it just is really creepy and almost looks like it has really bad arthritis.
Yeah.
Like one of those really creepy trees. That's what one of these trees reminds me of. And the more I look at it, the more comfortable I get with it. But when I go sit underneath the tree and I'm just looking at the moon and looking across the water, I feel a lot more comfortable.
So maybe that's like a veil he's put up,
Yeah. And I like to do this. It's my new kind of, one of my hobbies when I look at art now is, it's probably really bad technique, but like looking at the painting and thinking what the painting looks like at different parts of the artist's process. Like what layers did he paint things in? And I try to use my imagination to figure out maybe his approach to this work. And did he paint the moon closer to the end or in the beginning and then paint the tree over it? But then it looks like there's that little blotches of light that he added after he added the tree. And, thinking about that process and, this whole time been thinking about my own struggle with mental illness and depression and where that hope comes in your struggle. It's the light, and not to be so cliche with like light and hope, but is that coming kind of toward the end of your struggle, in the middle, throughout?
I think it's interesting that you just even, sure talking about the artist technique, but you talked about your looking technique.
Yeah,
That's pretty wild.
Kind of fun to think about. Try it.
Days of Future Past and Louis Blues. There's a line there, it's about the day begins, and I think of it every time I see this painting. It's cold-hearted orb that rules the night, removes the colors from our sight. Red is gray and yellow white, but we decide which is right and which is the illusion. Red is gray and yellow white, because color is removed as light settles, and you're talking about the flatness. The only reason the world is three-dimensional, some days there's flatter light than others. If you look at the world, it looks less dimensional, because you have to have a highlight side and a shadow side. When the moon comes out, the colors go, and that starts to fade. It's a harsh highlight side and shadow side, but they're opposite, not rounded in form. It flattens, it takes color away, and he actually captures that incredibly well.
Yeah.
He knows how to speak that.